Hey everyone, I'm Wingman, and welcome to this tutorial for how to make some fun and useful particle effects in Godot 4. We've got a couple little examples we're going to make today. First up, this Spaceship Thruster here. We've got an explosion effect, a kind of grass pop up in the air, like if you're cutting a grass block, and then this cover the screen in rain effect. So if any of those interest you, let's dive in. So first, let's look at this Spaceship Thruster. If we zoom in a bit here, that's kind of what it looks like up close. And let's hide this example here so we can make our own. We start with just a basic spaceship sprite here. I got this player ship blue from Kenny. I'll put the link in the description below. Kenny is great for prototype assets like this. And now let's make our own new particle effect. Add a child node. You're going to want to come here to GPU particles 2D. There's also a CPU particles 2D, but the GPU particles 2D is going to use the GPU, which is something we want to do whenever possible in game dev for performance reasons. So not much is happening right here because it's up here being blocked by the ship. If we drop it down to the bottom, still not seeing anything. Oh, right, we're using GPU particles. We have to go up and add the process material, new particle process material, before anything happens. And now we can see we have a basic little particle effect here. And now that we have this basic particle here, the first thing we're going to want to change is this gravity here, because we are looking at a top-down view. We don't want a gravity to automatically pull things to the bottom. The spaceship may not always be pointing up, unless I guess you're making a game in which the spaceship is always pointing up, like a classic Galaga. But anyway, let's just set that to 0 for now, and you'll see the points are no longer being pulled downward. And instead, what we're going to do is we're going to go over to our initial velocity here, set the minimum to 64, which will automatically change the maximum to 64 as well. You'll now notice that they're pointing sideways. That's because of this direction variable. So let's again zero that out. And we want it to go downward relative to the parent. So let's make that a 0, 1, 0 instead of the 1, 0, 0. And now we can see our particles are being directed downwards towards the x0, y1 vector. Next up here is this spread. That basically controls how wide things are. So we pull it all the way out here. You're seeing particles nearly pretty much in a semicircle. We pull it all the way down to 0, back in a straight line. Let's keep it pretty simple, maybe like 5. So it's enough variety to make it visually interesting, but still clearly coming out from the back of the spaceship in a nice little vertical pattern. And now to make it look a little bit more like fire coming out the back of an engine, let's go down and let's give these particles some color under here, under the color tab, and let's make that nice and red. Maybe kind of orangey red. Doesn't have to be perfectly. There we go. But it's still just looking like dot, 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 dots. We're not getting a whole big flame. So the two things we're going to want to do there are first up to emission shape. Right now, emission shape is a point. They're emitting out of this exact point right here. We want the flames to be coming out of the entire back of the spaceship. So if we come up here to box, we can give it some horizontal distance. Now you can see they're coming out of a lot wider space. I'll put that up to there. That looks about right. But it's still not very many particles. It's dot, 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 and not the big stream of flame. So we go up here to this amount, which is, as you can see, number of particles emitted in one emission cycle. We bump that up to, say, 32. Now we're seeing a lot more fire coming out the back of our engine. However, if we play this scene, that's looking pretty small. It makes it almost kind of hard to see our particles. So we can go down also to this scale, bump it up to scale 2, and now our particles are a little bigger. That's a lot more able to be seen. And we can also go down here to something called trails. Here's where things get really fun. If you hit trails enabled, it's going to start tracking those particles as streams, not just single particles. And if we go down here and let's, don't need to do that part. Go down, where was it? Right. Oh, sorry, time. That's the lifetime of the particles. Bump that down to about 0.3. Then now we're seeing our flame. And that looks kind of like an active flame coming out the back of our ship. Looking at the examples, we got, yeah, those streams coming out the back in our box shape. And feel free to tweet that however you like from there, but that's a good kind of starting place for this. But let's say our cute little spaceship here gets hit by a missile. We don't just want it to blink out of existence, we want to give her a proper send-off. Go off with a bang, a real explosion. Maybe something like this. So to make one of these, let's again add another GPU particles 2D node. Drag it to the middle of the screen so we can actually see it. And add our new particle process material as we've been doing. And once again, we can we zoom in a bit. We can see it's just dribbling a little bit of particles down there like that. As always, first thing I like to do is zero out the gravity and just mess with the stuff ourselves. Like the direction, for example, we want it to go 180 degrees. Actually, we can't see that because there's no initial velocity. So for initial velocity, let's give it 96 to be properly shooting out. And we can even give it a bit of variation, say between 96 and 128. That's not very many particles though, so let's bump this up to an amount of 64. Now you can see the direction is spattering them all about. Once again, we're going to want to, we can bump our scale up to 2, so it's more visible when fully zoomed out. Now to make it look more like an explosion, we're going to hop down in here into the color and give it be kind of a an orangish. Actually, let me just go back to the RGB. That's gonna be easier. Yeah, kind of a red orange like that, maybe. There we go. Yeah, that's looking about what we want. But to add a little bit more variation, we can go down here into the hue variation. Say minus 0.08 and plus 0.08. And now, it's hard to see because it's just single particles, but these particles have a little bit of variation in that color. To make that more visible, we'll go back down here to our trails, like we've done before, and maybe bump that down to 0.1. What we're going to do to make it actually work like an explosion, just pop out once to stop, is this one-shot thing here. You'll notice when I click that, it's not going anymore. But when I pop up here to emitting and set it to emitting once, it shoots out all the particles and then stops, like an explosion. But it doesn't feel very explosive. It's just kind of still one particle at a time. Thankfully, we have a parameter down here called explosiveness, which if we set, say, up to 1, the fully opposite, it'll emit all the particles exactly at once. And then if you can set this further down, I like around 0.8 to get just a little bit of variation in the explosiveness. We're still starting at roughly one big pop, but you're getting a little bit. It's not a perfect circle. And lastly, one thing we can do to add even more little... So right now, actually, if we bump this, it's all starting exactly from that tiny little point there. If we want it to start from maybe a little further out, we can use this pre-process. Say started at 0.2 seconds. That's going to essentially run the effect for, where'd I go? 0.2 seconds before it starts visually displaying it. So now you'll see some of those explosive particles are already a little bit away from the center. We're not necessarily emitting exactly from the single point here. And just like that, we've made ourselves an explosion. Our next particle effect I'm calling a grass pop, or grass poof. feel free to give your own name to it. This would be something you could implement if you're making, say, a Stardew Valley type game or a Minecraft type game where your character maybe cuts down a plant and you want to have these little leaf particles pop up and slowly float back down. So let's make our own one of these, again starting with making a new particles node, and over here on process material, new particle process material as usual. Once again, we got this slow little dribble of basic white particles. First thing we're going to want to do, we're actually not going to zero out the gravity this time. We're going to use the gravity. Is instead of going the base direction being x1 to the right, we're going to say y equals -1 in the up direction, which doesn't matter because we haven't added an initial velocity, but let's do that now. You have an initial velocity of, say, 64 to 96. Let's give a little bit of variation there. Now you can see we're shooting up in the air. I don't think we want it to be quite that far around, so we can bump this down to about 20 or so. Get a little smaller, maybe even 30. A little triangle here. But these are just kind of shooting up in the air and staying there, so we need to increase the gravity. Let's bump it up to 160 or so. So now we're seeing the particles have this arc of going up into the air and then crash back down. Looking down the list, let's again bump up our scale to 2 to play with a very pixel art style. Set the color to a more grass green. See if we can get kind of a darker green there. Yeah, that should work. And now we've got our little green grass particles popping up into the air and coming back down. Lastly, let's mess with our time here. We can bump this down to 0.9 a bit, so that it's not falling too far below, or even, yeah, just play with it however you like. I kind of like 0.8, you get enough of the shoot up and then fall back down. And the most important thing here, again setting to one shot just like the last time, because we want to trigger it once and have it just pop up and stop. So we have the one shot working, but we again need to add the explosiveness. Let's bump the explosiveness all the way up this time. And now we've got our pop and pop. Pop. And our last particle effect I want to look at today is this full screen rain effect. If we actually pull up the scene and play the whole scene, we can see this rain is covering the whole scene like this. So let's go ahead and close out our existing one, and once again, make a new one, new particle process material. And notice that this particle effect is a child of a just basic node 2D at the very top middle of the scene. That's going to make it easier for us to create this effect across the whole screen. So the first thing we're going to want to mess with is, let's go ahead and bump the amount up a lot. We will need a lot of particles for this to cover, again, the entire screen. Looking at the emission shape, let's change this to a box because we want it to emit across the entire width of the screen. So let's bump this up to 500 or so. Not quite there. 600 should do the trick. However, you'll notice these particles are not falling very far. They're not covering the whole screen. It's just this little bit at the top. So we're going to need to go down into time, have these last at least 2 seconds. That's going to take them a little longer. But instead of relying on gravity, zero this out as usual, let's just give them an initial velocity of 512. However, you'll notice this is firing horizontally, so we'll go up to our direction, and instead of that way, give it a downward vector. So now it's falling down, but it's going very chaotically. We don't want quite 45 degrees of spread. Let's just have it go straight down for now. And then we can add a little bit of extra direction and spread later. This white is looking more like snow than rain at the moment, so let's head down to our color. make it more blue, kind of a dark blue there. But that's hard to see against our dark background, so we'll give it a little bit of scale, say 2 to 3. Now we've got some nice little rain effects coming straight down. But if you don't want your rain to come straight down, we can add just a little bit of variation in the direction. Usually in a rainstorm, there's some wind going on, so the rain is going a little bit to one way or the other. So we can say maybe 0.1 that direction. And now you can see that the rain is kind of going a little bit left to right, as if there's some of that wind blowing it that way. And we can add just a hair of spread, maybe, 2 degrees here or there. So now it's not perfect lines, but if we look at it up close, we've got rain coming down kind of at an angle with a little bit of variation, and it's looking like a nice natural rain effect. Thank you everyone for watching. Have a nice day.